Hey everyone, this is Danny Nierenberg, president of Food Tank. Welcome to our Facebook Live today. I'm really thrilled to be joined by Joanna Kane-Potaka, the Director of External Relations and Strategic Marketing for the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, or ICRISAT. Joanna is joining us from Sydney, I believe, this evening for her. Thanks for staying up late. We're really thrilled to have you. ICRISAT is an international organization that researches agriculture for the semi-arid tropics of Africa and India. And their mission is to reduce poverty and eliminate malnutrition and improve food security for farmers and rural people in those regions. Joanna, we've known each other for a long time now, maybe 8 years. And I'm just so, we've only met a couple times in person, and it's so great to have you join us. And we're really excited to hear more about what you're doing with ICRISAT, with the Smart Food Initiative, and some of the other things that are important to your work. Can you just go ahead and say a few words about yourself?
Oh, sure, Daniela. Well, thanks for inviting me along tonight, or today for you. Actually, my original background is in economics, but I moved into the non-profit field about 21 years ago when I left Australia, and I've worked in about 6 different countries, different international non-profits, pretty much always in agriculture, but in different areas, from fisheries to biodiversity to water management, now to the area where we're focused on the dry lands, basically, of Africa and Asia.
Thank you. We just want to dive right into discussion, and I'm interested in hearing from you. What are some of the biggest challenges facing the farmers that you work with in the semi-arid tropics? What are the biggest problems they face every day in fields, and how are they working to solve them?
Yeah. So these semi-arid tropics, which for short we often just say the dry lands to keep it simple, but they're really the toughest areas to work in. They're the areas that have the highest poverty, the highest malnutrition, the worst environmental degradation. So the soil degradation is high. They're the areas with the very difficult with the water scarcity issues, and the areas that are going to be hit hardest by climate change as well. So there really are really challenging areas, and the areas that actually are going to take the longest to reach the SDGs. So they're not the low-hanging fruit, but yet they're 60% of the land that's used for agriculture across Africa and Asia. So really it needs the earliest investment, because if we really want to reach the SDGs, they need investment now urgently, really.
So the SDGs are the Sustainable Development Goals for our listeners who might not understand all the acronyms. You mentioned climate change. Why are the folks living in these areas hardest hit by climate change? Can you expand a little bit on that?
Okay, so they're areas that are already very hot and areas that already have the water scarcity. Now we know with climate change, temperatures are only going to get hotter. So they're going to reach extreme temperatures there. Plus, we're going to get more extremes of droughts and floods. So they're going to have more extreme droughts in these areas. And because they're water scarce areas, then, it can lead to very, very huge, major traumatic times of just no food being available. Absolutely.
So that kind of leads me to this Smart Food Initiative that ICRISAT has taken on. Why is that? You explain what smart foods are, first of all, but why are they important for alleviating and mitigating climate change?
Yeah. So the smart foods, we say, have got defined by 3 criteria. So they have to be good for you, good for the planet, and good for the farmer. So the good for you means they're highly nutritious. So it's not just focusing on any foods. Good for the planet means it's more environmentally sustainable. And in these areas, it can mean they can survive in higher temperatures and with less water, and more sustainable on the soils. And then good for the farmer, the 3rd criteria, it's good for the farmer in different ways. This also because if they're climate smart crops, so they're highly resilient, then it's a good risk management strategy for the farmers. It may be good for the farmer because there's multiple uses, or some of them are good for fodder as well as for food, sorry. And also, well, we also say, well, it's not necessarily good for the farmer unless we can develop that whole value chain. So it's important with the smart foods that we're looking at the whole value chain being developed too.
So what are these smart foods?
Right. So some examples in these areas would be the millets, the sorghum, and some of the grain legumes. And so the millets and sorghum are particularly hardy. They survive in very high temperatures. The millets, we often say, are the last crop standing in times of drought. So hugely resilient and take very high temperatures. They also survive with minimal fertilizers or pesticides, so they have a very low carbon footprint. So it's a mitigation there for the climate change as well.
And what do they taste like?
Okay.
What some of these foods taste like.
All right, I'm going to have to bring you some, Danny, next time.
No, I've had them, but I think for the folks listening, I don't think they understand what a millet looks like, or what a sorghum looks like, or what they taste like, and just sort of walk us through that.
Yeah, so they're the traditional foods across many parts of Asia and Africa. Okay, so there are many different types of millets. There are 9 main types that we work with. They can be cooked, some of them, depending on which millet it is, they can be cooked exactly like rice or like a couscous. So they're a great replacement for rice, especially white refined rice, which has basically had the nutrients stripped out of it and is just high glycemic index and high carbohydrate. But they can also be cooked, because they're a grain, they can be made into a flour. Now they're gluten-free, so it's a gluten-free flour, so you can make any bakery product. But knowing that they're gluten-free, so you need something else to help it rise. They can be used in soup, like grain soups. They're great porridge, because some of them are very high in calcium. So the finger millets, extremely high in calcium. So actually there's no other food in the world that I've found yet that's as high in calcium where you can eat it in significant quantities. Like something like sesame seed is, but you can't really eat 100 grams of sesame seed. Whereas the millets have got 3 times the amount of calcium as milk. So traditionally it was a weaning porridge for babies across Africa and many areas of Asia. So it makes a great porridge. I often use even half rolled oats and half millet, and it's delicious. Mm-hmm. It's used in salad quite often. The sorghum or some of the millets are used like a couscous or in salads. We've made sushi with them, a rice-free sushi. So many different ways.
That's fantastic. And so you mentioned that smart foods need to be good for farmers. Can you talk about, the process of encouraging farmers to grow more of these smart foods, and then what the results are? Yeah.
So I think the main thing here is how we develop the value chain. Often they are the crop of last resort for the farmer, not because they're not hugely resilient and they'd survive well, but simply because the value chain now isn't developed. Even though they were the traditional foods, now we have the big industrial crops, like what I call the big 3, the wheat, maize and rice, which is so well developed. The farmers will often grow that, even though it doesn't suit their agroecology. They don't have the water that is needed for rice or wheat. But the value chain is there. The seed is available. They know they can sell the end grain. They know pretty much the price they'll get for it. It's all well organised. So what we have to do is learn from the big 3 and see how they were successful and how we need to break into that. We need to have not just 3 big, we need to diversify diets. We need to diversify on farm. It's critical. So we need to do that, though, with not just anything. It really needs to be with smart foods.
Great. I think, I'm interested in how you, market these to farmers. How do you sort of change their mindset to get away from the big 3? And 2, how do you market to to consumers in the countries where some of these smart foods are being grown. And then, you know, the opportunity for expanding the use of these foods, you know, in other markets in the West or in places, you know, like Sydney or New Orleans where I live.
So that's key in our strategy. When we looked at, okay, how do we break this food system divide and bring in more foods into mainstream, we decided that our main approach needed to be from the consumer end. Most efforts that have been put in these alternate crops in the past have been mainly at production end. So we're looking at how do we drive it from the consumers. It's about consumer campaigns, as well as working with processors, food service industry, health industry, about how we popularise it. So we would actually, there's quite a movement now in India. Slowly it's getting there in Africa, although it's still a lot further behind. I mean, India is the most advanced in the world with processing of millets. The range of products just in the last 5 years is just significantly increased. So what we're doing to help towards this is we're bringing out later this year the scientific case on how millets and sorghum are good for you, good for the planet, good for the farmer. So that gives us a scientific base behind any marketing campaigns, and especially the good for you component, where people will, like, it really is the next big superfood. It's just so unknown at the moment, but it's important that we have science behind any claims. So we'll come out with that later in the year, and then we'll be ready to do a lot of campaigning around that.
And do you anticipate, you know, sort of what happened with quinoa over the last 15 years, that, you know, more restaurants, more people will have, you know, millets and sorghums on their pantry shelves? Do you anticipate that, you know, regular, you know, parents, soccer dads and soccer moms in the United States will be cooking this for their kids?
Okay, so we do in the Western markets like the US, Australia, UK, Europe, and especially as millets really, really fit into some of the biggest global health food trends. I mean, it's an ancient grain, it's a superfood because of the super nutrition in it, it's gluten-free, it's low glycemic index, so really important for managing or preventing diabetes. Also is actually great for losing weight as well. So it has all the big, it fits into all the big Western global food trends. So yes, we do expect it to really be able to pick up on that. But we're also concerned about developing countries as well. We don't want it to only be a food in the urban wealthy markets. It's really important to us. How do these rural communities and poorer communities benefit? How do they benefit both nutritionally and from a livelihoods perspective? So part of our strategy is after we've sort of looked at how we drive consumer markets, which has to be in the West and the urban markets as well, but then how do we ensure the rural communities and the farmers benefit from that, which is about how we engage them in the value chain. And it's also about how we promote their consumption as well as the growing of these really nutritious foods.
So break that down for us. What does that look like, working directly with those farmers and including them in the whole sort of, you know, you keep mentioning value chain, but, you know, what does that mean? And what does that mean for the farmers themselves? What does it look like when you are working with a farmer herself directly?
Yeah, so there's a few components that we're looking at. So one is how you engage farmers in at least primary level processing. So the grading, the sorting, the cleaning, the dehulling, etc. So how you set it up so farmer producer organisations can do that. And so they add more value and get more returns. Another angle is we're working with SMEs and others in how we connect them directly to buy directly from farmers. And the third angle is we're looking at how we do a certification of smart food. Because what's happened with certification is there are certifications around good for you, so around the health of food. So in Australia, something low in cholesterol gets a National Heart Foundation tick. There's certifications around something that's environmentally friendly. So fish caught in a sustainable manner, the Marine Stewardship Council certifies them as sustainably caught fish. And then there's ones around good for the farmer, like fair trade and others as well. but nobody's brought all three together. And if we have a certification for this, it also means part of that is how the farmers benefit from it as well.
And do you think that kind of certification process, you know, I feel like, especially in the United States, we have so many labels right now. And often, for even people like me, you know, and this is my life, right? It can be very overwhelming to go into a grocery store and, you know, sort of choose between fair trade and animal welfare certified and all of these other things. Do you think that's confusing? How will, you know, ICRISAT make that process sort of easier for consumers to understand that this is truly good for a farmer?
Yeah, certification is really challenging no matter what. We certainly have a requirement that we want it to be simple as possible, but there's always a trade-off between simplicity and being cost-effective with actually the credibility of it. And there is a movement of many companies out of certification because they've found that it's not getting the returns from the consumer, and probably because of the reasons you just said, and it's very costly. And there's still always loopholes. I mean, nothing's going to be perfect. What we're doing is we're going to do a trial run where we work with a cluster of SMEs first.
Like how SMEs are to our viewers, please.
The small, medium enterprises. So we'll work with food processors in a cluster first in adopting this and trialling it, and how we even can maybe even use a peer system as well, and how we make it a transparent system. So consumers can also have more transparency in and can see the certification. So it's got to start with an experiment.
Sure.
But, yeah, so we'll try and do that.
So Food Tank has been working with you for a little bit and helping sort of publicize some of the work that's being done around the Smart Food initiative. And I just wanted you to describe some of the awareness building campaigns, both on the farmer side and on the consumer side, because I think there's been some very interesting, you know, public communications that have gone on around this project in Africa and India as well.
Yeah. So one example in Africa, in Kenya, where we've started what I call reality TV for a cause. So we've been running, last year we ran our first Smart Food reality TV show, where we were able to get a prize donated for a scholarship at a catering university. So it attracted a lot of young people, and they had to cook with a lot of millet, sorghum, legumes, any of the smart foods. So that was really successful, and USAID helped fund that, and so it was so successful. Now this year we think we could be self-funding through sponsorship, and that was targeting urban people in Kenya. And we did that in unison while having a program on the ground in the rural areas. And the idea is how we match urban and rural as well. So what we did is we worked with the rural health workers, the agricultural extension officers, and the teachers. So it was the first time they brought together the education department, the agriculture department, and the health department, and had the same messages about the nutrition, the diversity of food, the value of these crops, and then tracked how people were diversified their diets as a result. So we found about 80% increase in diversity of diets for the children, which is a fantastic result. We found only about 20% increase in the diversity of the mother's diet. So what we learned from that is the mothers gave preference to the children. So in phase 2, what we have to do is have a much stronger emphasis in ensuring the mothers and then the rest of the families also take care of their own nutrition as well. But it was very successful from that angle. So, and they increased the amount they grew as well as the amount they ate and diversified their diets. So livelihoods and nutrition were looked at for the urban areas, for the rural areas. What we've just started in India, we want to also start this reality TV for a cause in India. So we didn't have the funding to do a full program. So what we're doing is, and I'm not sure if it's been done before, but reality TV in capsules, 4-minute capsules, 3 to 4 minutes. So we have a cook-off between 2 people. So we just did the pilot about a week ago, where we had a student from one catering college versus a student from another catering college, the two colleges against each other, and they were given the challenge of making a millet drink. And so then we had a chef judge that. So it's a sort of 3 to 4 minute capsule playoff, and the winner goes on to the next round. So we're just starting that up. So yeah, we'll continue with that, but we've got a lot more to come.
So interesting. And you bring up a couple of points that are interesting to me. One is the importance of youth and encouraging both young farmers and young cooks to be involved in this. Can you talk a little bit about why youth are so, important to this kind of work?
Yeah. So what's happened, especially with some of the traditional foods like millet, is they've become now seen as old-fashioned food or food for the poor people, or only the grandparents talk about it. And so we have to change the image. Part of this is not just promoting it, but actually changing the image as well. So part of that is engaging the youth. And it's also working with these food processors in making modern, convenient products. It's how do we modernise those traditional foods so that it comes and people see them as convenient and modern foods as well. So that's been important.
And you also talked about chefs, and I feel like, especially in the West, chefs have really been, over the last decade, at the forefront of promoting sustainability in so many ways. In the United States, we have the James Beard Foundation, which works really diligently with especially young chefs to promote sustainability. And so you're working with really interesting chefs, as judges, as sort of food innovators and inventors. Can you talk a little bit about why it's important to engage with that culinary world as well?
Yeah, so we've just been having meetings to try to set up a smart food network. It was going to be a culinary movement, but we decided to make it broader because we think part of the value with the chefs and the whole food service sector is how you engage them across sectors. How do you engage them with the health industry? How do you engage them with the food processors? How do you engage them with the farmers? So we decided to make it a broader network, but we're linking in with others. For example, there's the Chef's Manifesto, which just got launched recently. The SDG advocacy group, which is really trying to get a lot of chefs together as well. So we're trying to see how we link the networks and work together, but then work across sectors as well. So we're just about to launch all of that as well. What we want to do is, it is about ensuring it's seen as upmarket and let the high-end chefs be able to create really amazing dishes with it, as well as being able to make it practical for the home user as well. And there are chefs that are prepared to work at both levels to really achieve that.
I think it's, so cool. And that, that word, making agriculture and making these foods cool again, I think it is so important. I want to step back a little bit and talk about sort of ICRISAT's work in general and ask you a few questions about sort of the importance of women farmers. So we already spoke about youth. Why are women such a sort of a target for ICRISAT's work, but why are they so important to the Smart Food Initiative and the other work that you're doing?
Yeah. Okay. So there's lots of reasons. I mean, certainly research has shown again and again, if you engage the women in the income earning components, that the whole family benefits a lot more because they're much more likely to spend that income earned to benefit the whole family, be it anything from the food people eat to sending the children to school. So it's important that the women engaged in the whole farming and so on. Another part is generally in these developing countries, they are the ones making the decision on what's eaten and what's cooked. So that's important for the nutritional aspect as well. They often aren't recognised as farmers, but the majority of the women in the rural areas are farming. It's often they're not recognised because they're not the landowners. They're not allowed to own land. In many parts of India, there's less than 2% of the land owned by women, yet they are the farmers. And And so it's critical if we want to move ahead. They're often very innovative and open and very keen to try new things. The women often are very, often they're not, in some of the developing countries, they're often not allowed to leave the home or the community or the village. So they're very good to engage them also in small agribusiness units, the primary processing that we talked about. We've worked with them. So, for example, in one of our projects in eastern Kenya, they used to grow millets and sorghum, and then people moved over to maize because it was given as the free food aid. They got used to growing that and eating that, and then they found that it's not suitable for those agroecologies because they are the dry land. So the crop would survive 1 in 4 years. So 3 and 4 years, those people did not have food. And it was quite a desperate situation, yet they would still keep growing maize because that value chain was developed. So what we had to do to overcome that, it was not just help them grow the food, it was help them set up the seed system so the seeds were available. It was teaching them how to cook it, how to, so they had to know what it tasted like to eat because a couple of generations had gone past. And it was setting up the agribusinesses. Now, what we found in those areas is most of the men, because the crops were failing, would go to the cities to look for work. So only the women were left behind. So we had to teach the women how to do the farming, the women how to do the cooking these millets and sorghum, and the women starting up the agribusinesses. So they were actually the key mainstay of the whole industry being set up.
And so how have these communities changed because these women have gained sort of more influence? They're certainly making more money. They're better fed. Their children are better fed. So it has multi-generational effects. What do these communities look like now because of the status of these women improving?
Yeah. So there's like you said, there's the income and the nutritional benefit. But the other core benefit is just that they develop themselves. They get excited. They realize their leadership potential. They realize how much they can do. They just love having the training and the ideas put forward. They're usually very innovative once given the opportunity. And so it's just wonderful to see that part. And they form their own groups. They have their own committees, and they just become different people. It's exciting to see.
Sure. So you've mentioned the importance of cooperatives and committees. Can you talk about why farmers' organizations are important for developing the markets and the value chain that's necessary to support the Smart Food Initiative and other projects?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the majority of the farmers in these countries are smallholder farmers, so they may have less than 2 hectares of land. So anyone with that small amount of land, they don't have the scale. They don't have the scale to have the machinery to mechanize. They want to take very, very low risks because they have very little leeway, and if anything goes wrong. And it's very hard for them to go and market their end product. They're taking a small quantity to a market, they're on their own. So they really need to come together to get the scale for any production work, the scale for the marketing work as well. And then when you're looking at agribusiness or primary level processing, then for the scale of that, they really do need to come together. So it definitely is a very important component.
So those farmers' organizations really help democratize the whole food system in these areas.
Yeah. And I mean, in places, for example, in India, the farm sizes are actually only getting smaller, which is quite surprising how it can, but it is. So it is critical to group the farmers to work together.
One of the things that I've heard from you throughout this interview, and we only have a few minutes left, is the lack of funding, the need for more funding. What would you like to what would you like to tell funders and governments why it's important to invest in smart food, of course, but also in agriculture in general? Because so many governments, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, have sort of neglected agriculture, and often at their own peril. Can you talk about why the need for investment is so important?
Yeah, I will, and I think I'll make a particular point, which is about focusing on the staples. Invest, but invest in the staples. And this is what very few people are doing. So we go into these countries and 70% of what's on someone's plate is one staple. So, for example, in many it might be white refined rice. Now, a lot of people are doing a lot of efforts in helping diversify diets. They're bringing in more vegetables, they may be bringing in legumes, etc. But they're dealing with what's 25% on someone's plate. So you're not having as big an impact. I mean, it's important what they're doing, but it's not having impact. And very few people are actually trying to say, we need to diversify the staples and with something that's a lot more nutritious and suitable for the environment, etc. And that's one of the big objectives on smart food, is how do we diversify the staples? Because we think if we don't focus there, we're not going to have the big impact that is needed. So I would say investment needs to start going to the staples. Now, everybody says, oh, there's no way you're going to be able to change those staples. How are you going to stop someone in Asia from eating rice? But, you know, if we don't tackle that, you're not going to tackle the core of a lot of the problems and make the big difference that can be made. And, you know, people didn't always start off eating white refined rice. That's not where they started. So we can't say it can't be changed. It's just how we do it. We have to think very carefully and be very clever about it, very smart.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point to end on. I want to let people know that they can get more information about ICRISAT and smart foods at ICRISAT.org, or they can visit foodtank.com. Joanna, you have been such a pleasure to talk to today. Thank you so much for being with us. Thanks to all of our listeners for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.